welcome back to the game. The game.
The game.
It's the game. Welcome back to the game. But you see, there's UFOs. There's a big UFO war in Antarctica in 1947, Sandra. Wow. And you didn't even know anything about it. And we're all paying the price every day because we don't know about it. That's why the Leafs lost the game last night.
You know what? There's a lot I don't know, Hugh. And why the Leafs lost is one of the greatest mysteries probably ever.
Sean, what's the problem? Why did the Leafs lose last night?
They gave up. They didn't have good defense in the last couple minutes, and Boston put an extra attacker, and that put massive pressure on their defense. It just cracked them.
They quit. Boston didn't quit.
They thought they had it in the bag, right? They got too cocky.
I got to give it to Boston. They beat a really rugged.
They deserve to win.
They did.
I said whoever wins this game deserves to win the series.
As much as I love the Maple Leafs, Boston was the better team, and they beat them.
Yep.
So you can't deny that.
They won.
You know, even though I don't
fair
like it.
and square.
They did.
Wow.
That's hockey. You either win or lose. There's no
no in between. There's no shades of gray here, right?
Well, they went in overtime and tied, so they could have won, but they didn't.
But how heartbreaking! Oh my God.
It was crushing.
I'm still heartbroken. Yeah, and I don't even care.
I just feel for everybody. That's you can hear a pin drop last night in Toronto.
You could.
It's just so everybody was in shock, mourning.
Yeah, we were.
Wow. It was like the JFK assassin. Well, maybe not, but
Not that bad.
And Toronto was on that level.
Yeah.
You can rank it up there with that kind of shock.
Maybe worse, actually.
Yeah, maybe worse because we're not Americans. So.
Okay, Sean. So let's see. What are we talking about today?
Canada's broken mosaic, the literary critics of multiculturalism. So in previous debates that we've had, you've raised some interesting questions and points of view, and I reviewed my previous interviews, and I wanted to try to find evidence to support my arguments that the multicultural policy is not a culture, it's a political system, a lot like socialism or communism, used to divide society into tribes. So politicians can, like if there's Abbotsford South Asian community condemns BC Liberals' ethnic outreach strategy. They used it in BC recently. We'll see in this election if actually it destroys the Liberal Party of Canada or people will it says, the New Democrats leaked the Liberals' ethnic vote outreach plan last Thursday. The 2012 document suggests officials from the Premier's office, the Multicultural Ministry, and the Liberal caucus plan to use taxpayer resources to glean voters from visible minority groups and better their chances in key ridings. The plan also suggested the government also apologizes around historical wrongs as a means to gain, quote, quick wins for the Liberals. And the Liberals have been known for this. This is the whole reason Trudeau did
and
this.
that is, you can, if they're using the policy and they're actually defining groups and targeting them just to get votes.
That's the reason it exists.
That is a wrong. Well, I'm not sure that's the reason it exists.
The same thing. Harper is totally guilty of that.
Get out. How?
In Quebec? Didn't he do that with all the French ridings?
Look,
and he did that in Brampton?
He did it with the French riding in spite of the fact that he knew that he wasn't going to be popular in Quebec. So he reached out to the progressive people in Quebec and hoping the hell that there was someone out there that didn't want to divide the country or separate. So it was kind of a Hail Mary strategy.
I know the Harper did a whole bunch of events that were specifically ethnic. And he went and spoke at those specifically ethnic
Well, Jason
events.
Kenney ran around like the world's biggest salesman to all the. He learned greetings in 170 different languages.
Oh my God.
He had to sell the party. That's what politics has become down to. That's what the multicultural policy has. Those are the barriers to the politicians.
You're really a salesperson.
But you're not just selling to Canadians. You're selling to groups and tribes and communities. And I'd just like to read this from the Northern Mangus, chapter 13, Frog in the Throat. Trudeau, ironically, had given the first shove himself. In October 1971, he had introduced legislation to make Canada, quote, a multicultural country within a bilingual framework. Remember, the bilingual is outside Quebec, only 8.5% of citizens speak French as a first language, so it's not even 1 out of 10. So in 1971, he had this amazing idea, or brilliant idea.
We can do
better. Henceforth, while only 2 languages were official, all cultures would be equal. This idea had originally been floated by the B&B Commission. The point, Trudeau explained, was to, quote, break down discriminatory attitudes and cultural jealousies, end quote. It actually created the opposite effect. Ukrainian Canadians, Italian Canadians, Chinese Canadians, and so on need no longer feel second-class citizens because Ottawa would officially recognize their cultures and would fund these. But while multiculturalism made bilingualism go down some throats a little easier and bought Trudeau a lot of ethnic votes, it obviously BC Liberals are trying to buy ethnic votes. They just got nailed for it, and we'll see whether or not they lose the election over it. I don't think they will, but I hope they do, because I don't want to see that kind of policy. I want to see people make the politicians punish them for this kind of thing. They're not campaigning on the issues. They're looking at people as a tribe instead of part of the Canadian society. I find that a form of racism and discrimination against people, especially if they feel like they're Canadian, and I hope they make her pay for it, because, you know,
I agree with you on that.
I'm really hoping that they feel Canadian enough to reject her vision of tribalism.
It's rare that you guys agree on
but
the same thing.
Multiculturalism made bilinguals would go down some throats a little easier and brought you to a lot of ethnic votes. It turned a lot of French Canadians off. The policy would, quote, accelerate the retreat of French Canadians into Quebec, Warren Guy Rocher, the vice chairman of the Canada Council, quote, outside Quebec, we are nothing more than another ethnic minority. So it basically marginalized the Quebec citizens and made them feel like they're not one of the founding people of the country. They're just another ethnic group in the country to be pandered to, and maybe that's why Harper went to Quebec, because he didn't want them feeling like they should be just another. He wanted to make them try to feel special, and even though it's an uphill battle for the Conservatives in Quebec because they're severely hated, they actually won, I think, 5 seats in the last election in Quebec. And when they asked the manager for the Conservatives, how many seats do you think you'll win? He goes, we're lucky to win 1. So they did 5 times as well as they thought they would do, because in Quebec, people are starting to wonder, like, how long is this going to drag on? How long is this battle between us and them and all the BS we've been up through for the last couple of decades? It's exhausting.
But I happen to know that Harper, before the election came, was doing a lot of events in Brampton and a lot of events in the Black community.
Well, I think Brampton is, what, the 8th largest city in Canada?
But he was targeting the Indian community, and also the Black community.
According to
a lot of those in Toronto as well.
According to the census data, 13% of people in Brampton speak Punjabi as a first language at home. That's 1 out of 10 citizens, or about 86,000 people. That's a massive. That's almost 100,000.
But he's as guilty as what you're saying that the guys in BC are doing now.
This is unfortunately he wants to win votes. They have to do this. Politicians.
But if you want them to get caught, why shouldn't Harper get caught? Be called
when you're a politician, you have to do things to win.
But you're saying you hope that these guys don't get out there.
I hope they lose.
Okay, well, so we could say the same thing for Harper.
Sanders, my little pit bull.
In his book, this book's called Sound and Illusions: The Cult of Multiculturalism by Neil Bissendath. He came to Canada in '73, and he released this book in 1994, and it was republished in 2002. It's a best-selling book. In his book, The New Canada by Preston Manning, I'll read a quote from it. It says, quote, people, regardless of their origin, do not immigrate to preserve their culture and nurture their ethnic distinctiveness. If they wish to do that, they would stay where they are because the environment is more conducive to the perpetuation of one's culture and ethnicity. Immigrants come here to become Canadians, to be productive and contributing members of their chosen society. I am one of them. I did not come here to be labeled as an ethnic or a member of the multicultural community, or to be coddled with preferential treatment, nurtured with special grants, and then sit on the sidelines and watch the world go by. I came here to be a member of the mainstream of the Canadian society. I do not need paternalism. I need opportunity. I do not want affirmative action. I expect fairness. I do not need special consideration. I wish to be treated equally. Whether or not I preserve my cultural background is my personal choice. Whether or not an ethnic group preserves its cultural background is the group's choice. The state has no business in either. And that was Professor Reyes Khan, chair of the political science department at the University of Winnipeg, saying that.
You know, that's making me... We need a new policy instead of multiculturalism.
How about
Sandra?
Interculturalism? I rewrote the charter to include interculturalism duties and responsibilities, and it would basically promote a pan-Canadian identity with the good and the bad of our history for all to study and see, and to show how we started out and how we progressed over time. It was a slow process, but I think we're getting to a better place.
So interculturalism.
And add property rights, because the charter doesn't have property rights like the Bill of Rights in the States, so we should... Interculturalism means shared values, shared language, shared history, shared...
Okay, so it doesn't matter about the culture. It means
everyone becomes a Canadian. Everyone has the same, everyone can have the same...
I think that could work.
On the same team.
Right? Actually, I think that's a really good idea.
See? After all this, we're finally coming together on it.
And I've never even heard that term, interculturalism. Is that an actual term?
It is. It's an actual term.
It comes from the Greek word for intercourse.
Yeah, it basically means intercourse, but not in the way you're thinking. I can see what you're thinking. This book's called J.L. Granstein released this best-selling book, Whose War Is It Anyway? How Canada Can Survive in the Post-9/11 World. I'll show you how multiculturalism encourages tribalism, which could lead to terrorism. Carol Off, in her book The Ghosts of the Medak Pocket, wrote of the 250,000 Croats who had arrived in Canada from the 60s on, quote, Their continuing identity as Croats was powerful and much encouraged by the Canadian government, she said. In 1971, Canada declared itself officially multicultural, and Ottawa began to offer millions of dollars to ethnic communities in Canada to preserve their immigrant identities, a well-meaning policy that unfortunately exacerbated the problem of the angry immigrants who weren't even trying to fit into the society of their adopted country. That was, of course, true for more than Croats. The government goes on, funded language schools and folklore centers, and also, as it turned out, publications disseminating radical nationalism and right-wing messages. Harper wouldn't like these people. What Ottawa did not try to do was to make Canadians out of them. OFF continues by delineating the pro-Nazi Eustache's connection among Canadian Croats and the extraordinary fact that the very idea of the independent Croatian nation, including part of Bosnia, was born at the Norville Community Centre, set up by Croatian Canadians in southern Ontario. This community centre became the heart of Gojek Suak territory. An Ottawa restaurant owner and house painter, when Franjo Trujman took over the government of Croatia in 1990, Sušak headed his leaders' call for the Croatian diaspora, because if you fund your group, you're no longer Canadian, you're just an ethnic community, or they call them diaspora, that's the word. I'm not too familiar with that word, but I've seen it more and more. To come home. In other words, not Canada, it's Croatia. He quickly became a provocateur, literally firing off calls, quote, the first shot in the Croatian War for Independence from Belgrade. Soon he was Croatia's defense minister. Remember, he was from Canada. He used his connections in Canada to raise money for Croatia, up to $200 million, OFF suggests, for weapons and aid. They used it for war jets, for tanks, for fully automatic weapons. Sušak eventually presided over the, quote, ethnic cleansing of Serbs in the Midek pocket, where Canadian soldiers, trying to prevent the slaughter of Serbian women, children, and old men, killed Croats in large-pitched battle. Is it fair to say that Sušak was a war criminal, and if not, he had not died before the creation of the International Criminal Court, he would almost certainly have been tried. The point of the Croatian events is that Canada completely failed to turn Sušak into a Canadian. He had arrived here in 1969 and lived in Canada for more than 2 decades, but his allegiance was to Croatia first, last, and always. Was he any different from the Sikh terrorists? Remember the bombings in 1885, which killed 329 Canadians? The Tamils, the Palestinians, the Irish, or the other ethnic Canadians who send money for political purposes or for guns to their ancestral homeland? Why has Canada failed to impress its values on the hearts of those to whom it gave shelter and citizenship? Why does the link of, quote, blood and soul remain so strong? And the key question, why won't the people who live here give their first allegiance to Canada and its national interests?
By the way, Sean, I just want to say I stopped sending guns to Ireland back in the 60s.
Thank you, Hugh. We appreciate that. Very Canadian of you.
I prefer to give them to the homeless people so they can defend themselves on the mean streets of Toronto.
In a previous debate, we mentioned that I mentioned that multiculturalism might affect our economic prowess, and you disagreed. So I actually found a book, Competing Against America, Why Canada's Fallen in the Race for Talent and Wealth and What to Do About It by Michael Alexander, 2005
Interesting.
book. Just like to read a little excerpt. I've chosen small excerpts. I'm not going to read big, huge things.
Okay, good. I'm enjoying this, Sean.
Very cool. This chapter is called Myth 3, Multiculturalism Promotes Peace and Prosperity. The politics of multiculturalism also eat away at the social conditions that promote national prosperity. The project of recommitting Canada to the equal opportunity ideal as the necessary means to achieving our economic potential will require all Canadians to focus on the task of cultivating their own talents and the talents of those around them, with a view to creating an atmosphere where decisions regarding advancement in schools, community associations, and the workplace are based on merit. Yet the great Canadian problem continues to be how to manifest the national will in the face of regional and linguistic divisions. Quebec and all those other ethnic groups that we mentioned before, all wanting entitlements from the government because we've encouraged, well, Trudeau set this thing up. And the omnipresent influence of American society. That problem has been exacerbated by multiculturalism, which invites us to divide ourselves in an almost infinite number of ways. Can we manifest the national will we need to build a just and prosperous society when the government asks us to define ourselves in relation to over 190 ethnic categories at last count? This problem is made all the worse by the conflicts that necessarily arise when groups compete for public entitlements and recognition. Multiculturalism undermines the national cohesion that we need to succeed in a fiercely competitive global economy. I think we're emerging from that primitive time. Like we're slowly emerging from that we mentioned in the last couple debates. I think it'll take a long time, but I think these conversations are necessary in order for us to make the transition. I think it'll take 20 years.
I think we've had a real problem always as a country putting forward what we're about.
Yeah, we don't promote ourselves.
We've always reacted against something.
Welcome to Canada. Don't come into the community. Stay as you are. We'll ignore you. We'll tolerate you, but we won't accept you. And
well, I think it's been tough for us to come up with our own national identity. I mean, that's a big old. I mean, people have been talking about that for a long time.
I talked to a couple of people in the subway yesterday, and when I was giving out my debate flyers to people, as I do and I was told by the gentleman that I talked to, a little gentleman from the Caribbean, he said Canada has no culture. I said, God bless you for saying that, but I hope. What about basketball, baseball, hockey, gender equality? And he's kind of giggling. He goes, okay, I watch your videos. I'm like, it's just some food for thought, right? Like, we've been conditioned to believe this, so what can I do other than to try to tell people we actually have something that binds us together?
And I think we don't give ourselves enough credit.
Yeah, we put ourselves down.
Somehow I think part of the Canadian psyche is we don't think we're good enough.
Cultural
suicide. We don't think we are...
lovable?
Yeah, that's it.
I think
you might be.
We're not lovable. No, I think the country needs to take Joshua's clearing course.
Yeah. You're right.
You guys ever read The Canadian Immigrant? This is August 2011.
Okay. Flower power.
Yeah, this is from the section Living, and Mainik Bhatt, an international trained journalist from India, writes about his everyday experience as an immigrant in this column. It's amazing it doesn't say as a Canadian in this column, but I'm just going to go with it because a lot of people think like this, so that's okay with me. So this is called Knowing Others Better. How much should we try to learn about other cultures? And this is what he said. The Chamber of Commerce I work for shares its office with several small businesses. These businesses, folks, come from different parts of the world, from Ukraine, Iran, China, India, among other places. We greet each other in the pantry, at the coffee shop, in the elevators. We nod, smile, occasionally exchange comments on the weather, and are on our way out. I've often felt that there's absolutely nothing that I know about them. How much do we know about others? How much should we know? These questions have particular relevance to Canada because multiculturalism is the prevailing ethos here. For most of us newcomers, however, multiculturalism is an empty slogan. It means nothing at all. It begins and ends by occasionally partaking food from another culture at the food court in the mall. While there are notable exceptions amongst us, by and large, we remain blissfully unaware of others. In sharp contrast to our attitude of deliberately ignoring other cultures, it is our pet peeve that mainstream Canada doesn't understand us. We assume it's our fundamental right that everyone else should know everything about us. And I'm a researcher, so I do know a lot about other countries' cultures. I study them because I had to compare Canada to other countries when I'm writing my book. Does Canada's culture, how different is it from the States? How does it stack up against the socialists in Europe? Pretty damn good, actually. We're not going broke like the European states. You know, we have gender equality. Some countries in Southeast Asia would love to have these things.
Yeah.
You know, they'd love to have them. It'd be better. They'd have better societies. How can they not know, after all, isn't this multicultural country? We fervently argue. This process passes through several phases. Initially, when the person is new to Canada, she or he attempts to adjust slightly while actually resisting, albeit unconsciously. Then, once she or he has been here for some time, about a year or so, and is vaguely familiar with the different ethnicities living here, she or he turns into a serious defender of his or own culture, disdainful, if not derisive, of others. We criticize what we don't understand. Yes, we do make some efforts to understand and learn about, quote, Canadian culture and somehow manage to get some basics right. But here too, often, our understanding is clouded by prejudices and an unwillingness to accept. In essence, that's what multiculturalism boils down to for most newcomers. And since Canadians are extremely politically correct, they seldom point this out to us.
You know what? It's funny. It's funny because this article actually reminds me of something that I think is really important. It's almost like if you aren't from another country,
you're
you have
loser,
less importance.
Or you don't belong.
And I'll tell you, okay, I grew up with that kind of feeling because my parents were born here. Okay, my grandparents, so I guess that makes me second or third generation. My grandparents were born there, but came here. So my parents were born here, and so most people I know in Toronto, they either came here themselves at a young age, or their parents are from. Their parents are from wherever. So I'm like one down, so second generation, third generation. And whenever they would say, so, you know, where are you from? I always felt like, well, nowhere. I'm just from here.
Absolutely.
I always felt less important. And even when I look at government systems now, you can go to malls and you can go to kiosks. And you see kiosks in these malls for new immigrants and settlements and people who So for people who are looking for jobs or ways to find jobs or education, we fall now. When you're from Canada, you actually fall between the cracks.
The problem is this
There's a lot of that.
Now, 2011 census, there was 7.2 million citizens foreign-born in the country. We have 35 million people. That's 20% of the Canadian population. We focus so much on the other, we forgot to focus on ourselves.
Yes, and I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that in judgment. What I'm saying is that it's basically it's almost like there's a forgotten sector now, because there's enough people that can say they are Canadian-born Canadian. That's getting bigger, and because we're so used to because everybody comes from somewhere else, we haven't thought about that growing population. And eventually all these people who come here are going to have kids who are going to be born here.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
There's evidence in Diane Francis's book, Immigration, the Economic Case, that their kids are actually struggling in the west end of Toronto in the school system. There's classes with at least 25 kids in the class that speak different languages, and the teachers can't deal with it. They don't know the languages of these kids, and they're exasperated. And it's a myth that the kids of immigrant parents will do better than the parents. There's actually studies done. If the parents do well, the kids usually do well. If the parents are doing poorly, it spills over. Yeah, the kids usually don't have any examples to go from.
That's probably a universal
I would think
thing.
so.
I think it is.
Okay, so I was going to say something, but now I forgot.
I need to read something from my book, but
okay. Well, yes, Sean. Yeah, we have to wrap it up soon. But go ahead and let's conclude.
Okay. How much time do I have?
Oh, I don't know. How much time you want? A couple minutes.
Jesus, I should have done this earlier.
Well, just do. Reading isn't the best on TV, but we do want to hear. We want to hear it. We want to hear.
All right.
The book, Sean. We want.
All right, I'll do two excerpts out of two really best-selling authors. Okay. William D. Gardner was a former Olympic athlete and a professor of English. He wrote 7 best-selling books. Some included The Book of Absolutes, a critique of relativism and a defense of universals, Constitutional Crack-Up, Canada and the Coming Showdown with Quebec, The Trouble with Democracy, and The Trouble with Canada. In 1992, William released a bestseller entitled, quote, The War Against the Family. It's a massive 600-page book. It's this big fat, I have it at home. I'm only got a quarter of the way through it. Here are William's thoughts on Canada's multicultural experiment. Quote, multiculturalism is another global ed thrust. It generally arises from a political effort to quell interethnic strife by segmenting the voting market and urging appeal to an abstract ideal labeled, quote, multicultural. All meaningful natural, cultural, ethnic differences which are subsumed under the reigning ideology by means of financial fact, they may be equally valid, but they're also intensely competitive with each other in philosophical, legal, and moral terms. Just to take one example in Canada, this has meant the extinguishing by omission of much of the core British history on which the nation was constructed. Teacher James S. Cunningham writes that, quote, of the 120 books approved as history texts by the Scarborough, Ontario Board of Education, names like Britain, British, and England were conspicuously left absent. There was no pride taught in our historic British connections. Rather, we were taught to shame for alleged colonial deeds. Cunningham says that barely a dozen of his 100 of college students had ever heard of the Magna Carta, which is where we got our bloody laws from, the Plains of Abraham, which was Wolfe defeated Montcalm, which made Canada an English-speaking nation, not a French one, or were aware of the British origins of the common law, which is again the Magna Carta, or those of our political institutions. A number of students even vehemently denied those things. Some recent Canadian history textbooks omit any mention whatsoever of World War II. As one letter writer complained, quote, my father died twice, killed once on the battlefield, and again by the history writers, end quote. And one more. J.L. Grandstein has received 6 honorary degrees and is a member of the Order of Canada. He has written, co-written, edited, co-edited 71 books, as many were bestsellers. He served as a director of the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa from 1998 to 2000. He also taught history at York University. Upon retirement in 1995, J.L. was named Professor Emeritus. In the spring of 1998, he published a highly acclaimed, quote, Who Killed Canadian History? Here's how the political correctness, cultural relativism, and socially engineered socialism became part of Canada's cultural heritage. Quote, the federal government committed to a multiculturalism that is enshrined in the Constitution as a fundamental characteristic of the nation promotes a very weak nationalism. Remain a Somali, a Taiwanese, a Ukrainian, or a Bolivian, the message goes, and you'll be just as good a Canadian as everyone else. In effect, the message is that Canada, or English Canada at least, has no culture. Moreover, the federal, provincial, and municipal governments will give any group money to preserve its original culture, heritage, and language. In Quebec, in sharp contrast, the provincial government controls immigration policy and follows a deliberate anti-Canadian approach as it half-heartedly tries to assimilate immigrants into the Francophone culture. Unthinking Canadians complacently assumed that our schools and our society had turned them into good, bland, peace-loving Canadians. But a combination of federal multiculturalism, ignorance of an understanding of their new homeland, and the practices of progressive education had prevented them from becoming what they ought to have become, Canadians.
Okay. Although what I would say is that despite all that doom and gloom, because it sounds doomy and gloomy,
it does.
I think that we're still doing all right. At least for now. Got to keep those fingers crossed. Got to keep the country together. Got to come up with a Canadian strategy.
Well, I think, yeah, and I think that's what he's saying. That's exactly what Sean is saying.
That's right, Sean.
I like the idea of interculturalism, though. That's a very...
And duties and responsibilities would define our country as, like gender equality. We should have some property rights. The government shouldn't be allowed to take people's properties.
I agree with that. And we should have the different cultures having intercourse with each other. Right? Sandra? That's what you said?
Okay. Sean, help me here.
Okay.
Well, you can understand them, I guess.
You don't even have to understand them.
Oh, God.
It's all about human relations. Human relations.
Forget the language, right? Just forget the language.
Don't need language.
Yeah, at the club after a couple of beers, I guess it just doesn't matter, right?
No.
So. Okay. Awesome,
But then gender
Sean.
wouldn't matter either.
Oh, well, it depends on who you are. Okay. Sean, thanks for doing this today. Thanks to Sandra. Thanks, everybody in the studio.
Awesome show.
It was a good show.
It was really good.
Yeah, it was good, actually.
I came in a little trepidatious, and now I'm ready for the rest of the week.
Miss, we had a mystery guest, and it all worked out.
All worked out perfect. Okay. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week for more Liquid Lunch here on thatchannel.com.
No more hail.
Breaking the code. Let's take the long road so we can share the seeds that we've sown.